Looking forward to Passover. There's a joke to be made about the exodus of the choir that I'm going to work on until spring. In 1648, the Congregationalist Christians who had come here to sort of found a religious utopia worked together to come up with what was called the Cambridge Platform. It was a way that these congregations would relate to one another and how they would govern themselves. One of the most important parts of that platform, of that way of governing, was that they would be able to choose their own ministers. No more a hierarchy saying who would be the minister of this congregation. The congregation would call to itself a minister who sort of spoke its language, or who they felt had come out of the congregation and was now their minister. So part of that deal is that when you all call us, you offer us your pulpit to use for a while. And part of the bargain is that you charge us ministers to speak from this pulpit as the truth as we see it. That's what I'm going to do. The first part of this sermon is the truth as I see it. Now, I tell people sometimes that disagreeing with the minister in a UU congregation is sort of like our denominational pastime. It's okay if you disagree with what I'm about to say. All that means is it must be Sunday. So They appeared to be upset that the people were coming, but I don't think that was the whole truth. The White House seems to have been looking for just this sort of conflict. Though they certainly aren't the first to do it, this presidential administration has, since its election campaign, scapegoated immigrants for America's biggest problems. From our defunded, struggling public education system to the job losses caused by the transition away from a production economy to inflated health care costs. Immigration and immigrants, they've been saying, are taking American jobs and using resources that rightfully belong to citizens. With his base convinced that immigrants are the problem, the president had been looking for a way to show himself tough on immigrants. When the exodus from Central America arrived at our southern border, thousands of people fleeing violence and looking for greater opportunity for themselves and their families, the president was prepared. He made it nearly impossible to seek asylum, likely in violation of international law. And the slowing of the asylum process made it inevitable that there would be a showdown, a conflict of one kind or another, when the 8,000 or so people in the exodus reached the border. Now, we've known these folks were coming for months, we've known. We could have built a massive system to help process these asylum claims. We could have put our greatest minds to work considering how we could both welcome the folks who came in need of asylum and do work in their countries of origin to create the conditions for peace and stability there to stem future migration flows. We know what causes these enormous waves of migration: poverty, warfare, gang violence, climate change. Instead, the U.S. government put up razor wire. They sent thousands of National Guard troops to languish at the border near the Thanksgiving holiday as a political stunt. And last week, when a couple hundred members of the Exodus became frustrated at being held in Mexico and tried to make it over the border, American forces shot tear gas into Mexico. Shot tear gas at barefoot children in diapers, at mothers and fathers who were trying to bring their families to a land of greater opportunity. Again, this is not exactly new. President Obama deported more people than any president before him. He, too, caved to calls for greater border security, and some of us protested when he did. This isn't a Democrat or Republican thing, although the tenor of anti-immigrant sentiment over the last couple of years has been especially hateful. But this is an American problem. This image, taken last Sunday by Pedro Pardo for Getty Images, invites us into the heart of the issue. In this season in which millions of Americans celebrate the birth of a migrant baby, this is Mary and Joseph, smuggling Jesus away from danger and into the heart of another empire. And what, America, shall we do with this family? What does it say about the soul of our nation that weapons and razor wire and calls for a wall are our response. Our theme this month is peace, and friends, peace, especially a peace that is widely inclusive of people around the globe who are suffering, is not easy, no matter which direction you come at it from. To bring about peace at our border, we'll probably have to do more than remove an elected leader or take away weapons. We'll have to look deeply at ourselves, certainly as a nation, but also as individuals. Look at ourselves. Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "We often think of peace as the absence of war, that if the powerful countries would reduce their weapons arsenals, we would have peace. But if we look deeply into the weapons, we see our own minds, our prejudices, fears, and ignorance. Even if we transport all the bombs to the moon, the roots of war and the roots of the bombs are still here in our hearts and minds, and sooner or later we will make new bombs. To work for peace," Thich Nhat Hanh said, "is to uproot war from ourselves and from the hearts of people. To work for peace is to uproot war from ourselves and from the hearts of people." And Thich Nhat Hanh said in another place, "Looking deeply together is the main task of a religious community." And so this morning, I want to set about that task for a few minutes, looking deeply into the weapons and walls and barbed wire at our southern border, which serve as a mirror, reflecting the American soul. When I look at those things, I see actually an old story. We human beings want to see ourselves as generous, and we usually are. But in unstable times, when we feel like our standing in the world or our livelihoods or maybe even our very existence is at stake, we look for a scapegoat. That term, you may know, comes from the Hebrew Bible. Once a year, the high priest would select a goat and place his hands on its head, symbolically laying on the animal all the sins of the Israelite people from the past year. He would then send the goat outside the walled city to wander in the desert and presumably die there, atoning for the people's sins in the sight of God. We tend to scapegoat, to place not necessarily our sins, but our fears onto one group of people or another. In American history, it's often been immigrants. When things look bleak, American politicians, with the support of the citizenry, have rounded up immigrants, demonized them, imprisoned them, deported them. What is happening now is not, I am sad to say, an aberration. It is a continuation. It is what our nation has done in reaction to hard times. It's logical, though. It is logical in these times to be afraid, because in some ways it really is a scary time. The world is changing quickly and dramatically. The nature of work is changing too, and people who once had good-paying jobs now have been left out of a job market that's transitioning from manufacturing to service work. The earth itself is under threat as the climate continues to change. For the first time in a long time this year, the life expectancy of the average American went down instead of up. It is no wonder that a whole lot of people are afraid, and that those of us who might not describe what we feel as fear carry around some level of anxiety that might be a little higher than typically we would. And maybe the best way to alleviate anxiety is to find someone to blame for all of our problems. Politicians who are now seemingly eternally running for election are often quick to blame other people, surely in part because they recognize that many, if not most of us, would rather not hear that these problems will only be solved if we reason together. But if we can avoid this, if we can avoid projecting our fears outward by blaming and really examine our fear, our anxiety, if we can look at the border wall and all the guns and see a projection of all of our fears, maybe peace has a chance. Unexamined fear causes us to hunker down and protect what we think is ours. If the goal is peace, we'll have to behave differently than that. I often suggest things that seem weird to people. I'm about to do that again, maybe. It's not intuitive. It takes some work, but we who are interested in peace, I think, would do well to get in touch with our fear, to acknowledge it, to sit with it, without acting for a little while, without doing anything. I think this is what the ancient poet Rumi suggested in his poem Guest House, when he wrote, "This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." Rumi didn't know it, I don't imagine, though maybe he did. But this enduring little poem has some grounding in evolutionary biology. Our friend fear has an important function. It tells us something is out of whack. It tells us that we may be in danger or a way of living may be in danger. We can be thankful for fear. Otherwise, we might walk into fires, stick our heads in lions' mouths. I had a hard time coming up with things that people don't do anyway. But you get what I'm saying. Fear can be a good thing. Problem is, we've evolved to react quickly, to find the source of fear and do away with it. It's evolutionary, but it isn't always helpful. Even those of us who don't believe in original sin might do well to acknowledge that sometimes things we have evolved to do are no longer in our best interest. Even if we don't believe in salvation, we may sometimes need to be saved from our own tendencies. Sometimes we have to work to go against our natures. When it comes to fear, we might do well to welcome it, to hold it, look it over, ask it what it says about us, that we're afraid of this thing, or afraid in this moment. When we've come to terms with our fear, there's other work to do. Maybe as we're coming to terms with our fear. To have peace, I think we have to be convinced of two things. First, we have to really believe that there's enough. Enough money, enough clothing, enough food and love and good ideas to solve our collective problems. This is not the strength of our sort of hyper-capitalist system, which wants us to always be responding to a need for something. Advertising creates the need. Businesses offer us the solution. Act now, we're told. Time is running out. And as someone said to me between services, if you're not making a profit anymore, you're no good to us. But if we look at the border with an eye to what it says about us, it tells us that we as a nation are acting out of a vacuum. We are scared. We sense things shifting around us, and they are. And we're not sure there's enough for us to have a comfortable living and for us to help those folks who are coming to our border seeking asylum. But we can say to our fear, no, there is enough for you and for me and for everyone in the world. There is enough. It may not be easy, but peace can come if we begin with the foundation of enough. Second, for peace to come, I think we need to believe that every person deserves basic human rights. We human beings are all in the same boat. How many of you have been in a boat before? Yeah? Canoe or anything? If I'm over here and there's a hole in the boat over there, that's kind of my problem too, even though I'm over here. Building a wall doesn't make it any less my problem. Keeping people on that side doesn't make it any less my problem. When there's a hole in the boat, we'd better get to work on fixing it and doing it together. If we're interested in the prosperity that only comes with peace, we will not build walls, but doors and windows. We will share our prosperity as widely as we can. We will work to eliminate around the globe the conditions that lead to violence, including hunger and poverty and climate change. Now, you and I may not have a lot of control over some of that, though we do have some control, and it's a good thing for us, I think, to work to figure out together how to do our part to work on those big problems. But we certainly do have control when it comes to our own action, and even when it comes to our spirits. So here's a question that has everything in the world to do with peace. How is it with your spirit? Are you afraid? If you are, that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. But do you know your fear well enough not to have your actions be dominated by it? I might ask myself, where do I worry that there's not enough for me? Not enough love, or not enough money, or not enough. How am I behaving toward other people because of that fear in my heart? Who do I know who's in need, and how might I be able to help even as I myself am worried? I believe these are the roots of peace. A conviction that there's enough for everyone, even in the face of fear, and that everyone deserves what enough can provide: life, liberty, and the pursuit of the good life. From that position, I think we can really make the world better. We've seen this past week an unfortunate reaction to fear, one that makes peace unlikely, if not impossible. But let all people of goodwill vow not to let our fear dictate our behavior, to build doors and windows, not walls. Instead, let us work to create the conditions for peace in our spheres of influence. Let us become familiar with our own fears of scarcity, of our own mortality. In spite of our fear, let us feed and clothe our hungry neighbors. Let us shelter those who come to us seeking asylum. And let us keep our hearts open to the possibility for peace. For, as our sixth principle says, world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. May it someday soon be so. Amen.